It's one of the leading causes. It's one of the leading causes of school absenteeism across Canada. More than 20,000 hospitalizations for childhood asthma occur each year, many during the fall months. So today, through our Back to School webinar, you'll learn strategies to help keep your child or student safe as they return to school, which will include recognizing asthma symptoms, knowing what to do during an asthma attack, avoiding asthma triggers in the classroom and at home, talking to your child about their asthma, and communicating effectively with your school about asthma. My name is Jeff Beach, and I'm the President and CEO of Asthma Canada. Before we begin, and I turn it over to our presenter, Joyce, just want to go over a few quick introductory and housekeeping points. So first of all, as I mentioned before the recording started and some of you joined us, we are recording this session and it will be available through all of our social networks and our website and YouTube channel very shortly. So we ask that you please share this with others, other parents and educators that you might think benefit from it, and it will live on as a resource through our website as well. Attendees are muted at this point. If you have any questions, comments, or issues, please type them in the chat box, which our team will be monitoring throughout the session. I want to take a moment also to thank all of you that submitted questions in advance. We will do our best to cover those through the presentation today, and then we'll also have a Q&A session for questions that we might not have covered in the content. I would just point out that some of the questions that were submitted were not related to this topic around September Asthma Peak and back to school and children returning to school. So some of those were more general questions or questions about specific medications. Those are not things that we'll be able to discuss in the webinar today. However, we do invite anyone at any time to reach out to us directly through our asthma and allergy helpline, which is a free service that we offer to people across the entire country in both English and French. And we'll share a bit more about that later on in the program. There will be a Q&A session after Joyce's presentation. So please feel free to type any questions that you may have in the Q&A function. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button for Q&A. That will allow you to submit questions and our team will monitor them. And as I said, we'll try to get through as many as we can. Keep in mind that we are not able to provide specific medical advice through these webinars, and we always refer everyone back to their healthcare provider. And again, if you'd like to reach out to our helpline, we have certified respiratory educators who are available and happy to help you. Joyce, if you could advance to the next slide, please. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we're meeting on a virtual platform, we take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we all call home. We recognize that those joining us are doing so from across various lands and territories, and for thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for these lands, and they continue to do so today. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work on these lands, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. Next slide, please. Very quickly, just want to highlight a bit about Asthma Canada and some of the work that we do. We're committed to improving the lives of Canadians with asthma through community education and support services, as well as advocacy and research. So we encourage self-management. We empower people to take control of their disease and control their symptoms through educational resources and services like the Allergy and Asthma Helpline, as well as the webinar series that you're participating in today. Our website, asthma.ca, is a wealth of information that is evidence-based and credible that you can count on, and it's available to you anytime you need it. We're also committed to bringing the voice of people living with asthma across Canada to the forefront of policy decisions that affect our community, advocating on important issues like sustainable clean air and energy, and choice and access to medication, asthma treatments, and healthcare. And of course, we also support research into better health outcomes and the eventual cure for asthma. Our national research program supports graduate level students who are studying early and late onset asthma. The Asthma Canada Member Alliance, as you see on the screen here, is our community, basically, and it's free. We encourage everyone to sign up for it. It's how we engage with people. It's how we share important news and updates. If you sign up for this, there's no charge, there's no obligation, other than you're agreeing that you'll receive information from us. We send out newsletters on a regular basis, And we also share important updates and information, opportunity to participate in research, and so forth. So please, if you haven't done so, visit asthma.ca. You should see a pop-up that comes up that you can register easily through when you visit our website. And finally, as a registered charity, we're not government funded other than some very specific programs. So all that we do, including this webinar, is made possible thanks to our sponsors and donors. So we thank all of our partners and our sponsors and donors for your loyal support. And we encourage those that can to make a donation to Asthma Canada. Again, that can be done through our website at asthma.ca if you are interested and able doing so. Now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter, Joyce Yee. Joyce is a certified respiratory educator. She provides asthma and COPD patients with the skills and knowledge that they need to increase their quality of life and decrease their dependence on the healthcare system. In addition to being an educator, Joyce has more than 18 years of experience on the front lines of respiratory care as a registered respiratory therapist in both acute and community care settings. She graduated with honors from the University of Toronto and the Michener Institute for Applied Health Sciences. She also is one of the certified respiratory educators that helps with our Asthma Canada helpline and various other activities. So Joyce, we're so pleased that you're able to join us, and I'll now turn the floor over to you for your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Jeff was saying earlier, there is a very high prevalence of asthma in Canada, and over 900,000 of those are children. It is the most common chronic respiratory disease, and it also accounts for the majority of hospitalizations in these children. And of course, the impact is that there is a lot of school absenteeism. So let's try to understand what asthma is. Asthma basically is what happens when the various airways throughout your lungs constrict, which prevents you from breathing easily. Feels like an elephant sitting on your chest, some kids might say. These three pictures here, you can see that there's a healthy airway, and what happens is the tube itself is quite wide and open. The wall is nice and thin, and the little white bands of smooth muscle on the outside of the tubes are nice and relaxed. For someone with asthma, what that then looks like is that you have a thickened wall of the breathing tube due to swelling and inflammation. There's also a lot more mucus. So then you see that the hole in the middle is a little more constricted. During a full asthma attack, the wall of the muscle of the airway is fully swollen. There's a lot more mucus production, and those nice bands of smooth muscle around the outside further constrict the airway, which results in a very small hole through which you can breathe. Symptoms can vary based on intensity, occurrence, and frequency. So what that looks like on the outside is that you can experience chest tightness, shortness of breath that doesn't resolve quickly, persistent cough, which happens more often at night or maybe early in the morning, which disrupts sleep, yours and theirs, and results in a fatigued child. Flare-ups can actually be caused by a number of exposures to a variety of triggers. And some of those triggers will include infections, especially viral respiratory infections. So colds, flu, RSV, COVID, some of you have asked about croup, allergens, which will include pollens, dust mites, molds, animal dander, and of course, irritants, including industrial smoke, strong odors, pollution or air quality, and of course, weather changes. So extreme temperatures like very cold air or very humid hot summers, as we've just had. We'll also notice that physical activity can cause some bronchospasm. Basically, when you exercise and you breathe a lot faster, that cold, dry air passing through your breathing tubes actually will cause some irritation, which can then cause an asthma attack. All right, the good news is that asthma can be controlled and well treated. You'll then notice fewer symptoms, little or no use of your reliever medication. Kids can have productive and physically active lives, and there's very near to normal or normal lung function. They'll experience less sleep disruptions and hopefully avoid more serious attacks. So it's important to remember that even with good control, there's no cure for asthma, but it can be treated and you can have a normal life. Because it's a dynamic process, you're going to notice that it improves and worsens based on the triggers and exposures to them. So with therapy, you can have the right medications at the right time to help manage that. Okay, so proper asthma management will include medications, which again, used appropriately, will help with control. This also includes asthma education, which helps with your self-management. One of those pieces is a written asthma action plan, which helps you navigate the symptom control. And of course, regular reassessment with your healthcare providers to reassess your control and any changes that might have happened. So let's talk about medication first. There's some questions about relievers versus controllers. It's kind of confusing, and as you can see from this slide, the number of medications you could be on are various, and the devices are all very different. So it's important to make sure that you're using the particular device you have correctly. So a reliever is actually also known as a rescue drug, and it's short acting, but fast acting, which is why we like it for rescue. So there's a tendency for the use when you have an asthma attack to have a nice little reaction where your airways then open up. That relief makes you then think that this is the only drug that you need. But use of this, overuse of the reliever does tend to have side effects as well. So that's when we look at the controller use. Controllers are what I like to consider a long game solution. It minimizes inflammation in your lungs, and you generally have to take it consistently, daily, for several weeks to achieve optimal effect. And so then once you have that inflammation under control, that underlying inflammation, then any flare-ups that happen are either not as serious or fewer and far between, which is a good thing. But of course, like I said, proper technique is essential. So using the gold standard is to use your inhaler with a spacer device, which we have here. There are, again, numerous spacer devices. The one we have here is a very typical one. It will have a mouthpiece, it will have a one-way valve, and I have a couple here. So this is one that has the valves where you'd put your inhaler, and of course the mouthpiece. For the smaller kids, what you'll find is you might need a mask because it's harder to coordinate that puff plus the inhale, or they have a hard time getting a good mouth seal on the mouthpiece. So that is another option. We had some questions about the Arrow to Go. This is actually another spacer device. Again, very typical. The nice thing about this is that it actually provides a storage area for your medication. So you would plug this in and then off you go. So why use a spacer? Basically, when you use an inhaler, you'll notice that the plume comes out quite quickly. When you couple that with a quick breath in, you're increasing that speed. And what happens is a lot of medication potentially hits the back of your throat and it doesn't make that 90-degree turn into your lungs. So what a spacer device does is it actually slows down that plume so that you're able to kind of make that turn. And I kind of compare that to anyone who might have driven on the highway. If you're going that fast and you need to take the off-ramp, in order to take the off-ramp safely and make that turn, you need to slow down the car. Same thing with this. What happens is that you then get a nice easy breath in, deposition is improved in the lungs, and you get the most medication where you need it. So that is why we like to use spacers. Another piece of the management is the asthma action plan. And as you can see here, we have the asthma.ca action plan, and it's a trifold, which helps to manage your child's symptoms. And it also helps with managing the control so that you know exactly where you sit on this and how to move if you lose control. So if you start to have increased symptoms, which it actually lists on here, which is helpful, then you can know that you can increase the amount of medication or the dose, right? Or sorry, the type of medication that you're using. So with that list of symptoms, you can also see that there are daily medications that can be taken and relief medications. It'll also tell you when and where to take them. So the nice thing about this is that you can copy it and share it with all of the major players in your child's life. So the school, the teacher, daycare, whatever you need. So the important piece to understand about the asthma action plan is when you navigate from the green to the yellow zone, where green is well controlled, yellow zone is where it's kind of getting worse. That movement from the yellow zone to the red zone can happen quite quickly. So it's important to use the instructions in the yellow zone to regain control as quickly as possible. And then, of course, if the symptoms persist, you then know exactly what to do if you happen to move into the red zone when symptoms get worse. It's important to work with your healthcare provider to kind of put together this plan and then share it with everybody who will be taking care of your child. So, we're all here for the September peak. What is the September Asthma Peak? They've noticed that there is a dramatic increase in hospitalization of children with asthma during this month, and it starts shortly after the return to school and then ends up peaking in the middle, and it carries on right into October. A quarter of children's hospital admissions happen during this 1 month of the year. And it's generally caused by an increased exposure to viral infections, um, increased exposure to allergens, and possibly a reduction in medication use that's happened over the summer. So, when school starts, we have an increased physical contact among the children and possibly poor hand hygiene, which combines to then increase that viral infection potential. You then have increased exposure to allergens. So I know we have a couple of teachers on the call here. And after a summer of having closed down the school, when you reopen, there's a lot of cleaning procedures that happen before we reopen the schools. And as a result, you're going to notice a lot more dust mites, a lot more mold, potentially animal dander, which then creates more of a problem for those kids who have allergy induced asthma. Of course, September is also ragweed season. So if that's an allergy potential trigger, then you have the building of a perfect storm here. Um, Generally, symptoms tend to do a little better in the summer. So, and summer being a little bit less structured, there might be a reduction in your controller medication use, which then um, sets you up a little more likely to have triggers once you go back to school. So those three factors actually contribute to why there is such a huge increase in hospitalizations. How to prepare for the September peak. So, if you have allergy induced asthma, you want to treat the allergies early to help avoid asthma attacks. Make sure you teach your children correct hand washing techniques, or in this case, you want to review how to hand wash properly. And if your child is sick, of course, keep them home. And then ensuring that vaccinations have been appropriately managed throughout your household. Okay, so tips for parents, caregivers, kids, and families. You want to speak to your children about asthma and make sure that they understand what it is and what their symptoms look like, in addition to how to avoid and identify their triggers. Teach them about their asthma medications. And to help with understanding their asthma a little better, Asthma Canada has developed the Asthma Control Diary, which allows a child to track. Once they complete it, they can track what's going on with their symptoms. They can see how well it's controlled, what they need to do. And this increases the fluency of how to manage their symptoms and triggers. It's also important to remember that in addition to your asthma or your allergy medications, to remember to use your controller meds as well throughout the year, even if you're symptom free. That helps to kind of keep that baseline inflammation reduced. And make sure that your child is carrying their reliever with them at all times, and also to know how and when to use it. Okay, now make sure that you're talking to your child's school about your child's asthma, letting them know what asthma is and your child's specific symptoms and triggers. Also, to explain the importance of your child always having easy access to their reliever inhalers. It also helps to make sure that they understand what to do when your child is having an asthma attack or an exacerbation. This can actually be helped by providing them with your asthma action plan. So if they see an increase in symptoms, they know exactly what to do. A lot of parents are wondering how to start that conversation with the schools, and so Asthma Canada has come up with the Back to School Guide for Teachers. This is a handy little information package that incorporates all of those things, all the elements I just discussed, and allows your school to kind of help manage and understand asthma a little better. Now I'm going to be talking to the teachers in the crowd. All right, why is it important for schools to know about asthma? Of course, as Jeff said, it's the leading cause of absenteeism. Uncontrolled asthma can lead to decreased academic performance. And of course, asthma can be controlled so that your kids can participate fully, and schools have a role in that. So, a child's health is strongly linked to their social, psychological, and intellectual development, as we know, which is why it's important for schools to actually improve not just their academic learning, but also their improving their health as well. Okay, the school's role in asthma control. Schools can promote asthma control by adopting asthma-friendly policies and procedures, coordinating services to support students with asthma, and providing asthma education for everybody. So you want to be able to create a process for identifying those children who have asthma and how to handle what happens when they have worsening asthma. Also encourage kids with asthma to participate in school activities to the best of their abilities. Just because you have asthma doesn't mean that you can't have fun. Identify and reduce asthma triggers, and then, of course, provide opportunities for asthma education. If you are, in fact, an asthma sufferer, this education can actually go a long way to kind of promote more education in the classroom, and ideally help you with your symptoms in managing any kind of triggers that children might bring in. Okay, so we're talking about teachers' role in managing asthma. So because you are the first line of exposure for that child, you get to see this child most and you're interacting with them. So it's easier for you to identify early warning signs of poor asthma control. You're also able to communicate the changes in any student's asthma and how that impacts their learning. You can easily access, ideally, you can easily access the student's medication and their action plan so that you are the touch point for how to manage that child's asthma. And also, you're able to encourage students with asthma to participate fully. How to recognize worsening asthma symptoms. So the common early signs of asthma attack are cough, a wheeze, fatigue, if that child is a little more lethargic, or if they have an inability to exercise without breathing issues. That means their asthma is not as well controlled as it should be. And that child is either restless, irritable, and or quiet. What can escalate into more threatening symptoms looks like trouble breathing, excessive coughing or wheezing, chest tightness, shortness of breath, lips or hands turning blue, if the child can't speak in full sentences, or the skin around the neck or chest start to suck in when they're trying to breathe. What to do in case of an asthma attack. So ensure that the student is sitting up straight. So basically posture and gravity can help that child take the best breath they can at the moment. Immediately have them take their reliever inhaler, the blue one, usually. And if they have a spacer, please use that. As I said, it's the best way to coordinate a breath when a child is having difficulty breathing. If the symptoms continue or worsen, make sure you're calling 911 and continue to use the reliever inhaler every 5 to 15 minutes until medical help does arrive. And of course, you want to contact the child's guardian or provider or caregiver to let them know what's happening. So to help with this process, Asthma Canada has a number of resources to support the Back to School with Asthma. There's a digital pack for parents and teachers available in both English and in French. Thanks. I'll hand it back over to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Joyce. That was really informative, and we really appreciate you taking time to share your expertise and your knowledge about asthma and how parents and children and schools can work together to keep kids safe during September peak. So we really appreciate that. We do have some questions that have been received in advance of the session today, and we also encourage people to submit questions through the Q&A, those that are joining live. If you have additional questions, please feel free to do so. We're just going to take some time over the next few minutes to address some of those questions that you may have. And so first, Joyce, I don't know if that's you moving the screen, but now I'm seeing.
Oh, sorry.
You'll have to. Okay. Are you stopped sharing?
Yes, I did. It's easier to manage the questions if that's okay.
I just suddenly saw myself front and center. little alarmed, but anyway, that's fine. So we'll get into some of the questions that we received. And as I said, if people have others, please feel free to ask them. So we have some teachers, as you mentioned, that have joined us today. And I know there will be lots of teachers that will be availing themselves of this resource, the recording later. What do you recommend in terms of teachers who actually have asthma themselves? What should they be sharing with their students, with the parents? Is it something that they should be communicating with parents and through a letter or some sort of formal way? What do you recommend? Just because teachers also, obviously, asthma is a disease that affects people of all ages. So, what should kids know about their teacher who has asthma, or what should they be sharing?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I love it because it's an education opportunity. So, for teachers who actually have asthma, in terms of how you share that information, it's entirely up to you because that is your personal health information. But to keep yourself safe in that environment, it's actually a good opportunity it's a good idea to kind of share maybe a generalized educational piece about asthma. So if you are communicating with parents, kind of through email or what have you, or just if you want to send out a flyer to send home with the kids, just let them know that someone in the class does have asthma and to be aware of avoiding bringing in triggers, whatever your triggers happen to be, whether that is animals or flowers, what have you. That's a good way to kind of avoid exposing yourself to any more triggers. And it's a good opportunity to kind of actually talk about what asthma is. We have a lot of educational information that can help you with that conversation, especially with children. In fact, we have a couple of comics that can share that information with you. All right. Hope that helps.
That's great. Yes, thank you, Joyce. And I'm sure the teachers will appreciate that advice. There were some questions that came in around exercise and asthma, and one of them that I thought was particularly interesting. You did a good job covering the topic, but how does someone differentiate between normally being out of breath with exercise? If you're exerting yourself, it's normal to be out of breath, especially I know you can't see below this line here, but I have a little extra weight around the middle. So when I exercise, I do experience some breathlessness. Is that something like how do you differentiate between what's normal versus what could be indicative of symptoms of asthma?
Absolutely. That's a great question as well. I like it because it kind of helps explain the difference between the two. And so normally being short of breath, it actually resolves quite quickly. So our bodies are made to kind of change in response to the things that we're doing. So if we're moving more quickly, we will breathe more quickly. Once we stop moving quickly, that breathing should also come back down to normal. However, with asthma, what you'll find is that the symptoms will persist. Your chest tightness will get worse. That feeling short of breath doesn't go away until you've had your medication. And sometimes when you have had your medication, if it does get worse, you need to seek medical attention. But you'll notice that symptoms like wheezing, chest tightness, that the shortness of breath doesn't go away. That is actually an indicator that something else is going on and it's not your normal exercise breathing.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Well, some questions came in from parents of children who are involved in sports and physical activities. And one of them specifically asked, what can we do to improve the management of my son's asthma and symptoms when he's actively playing sports?
Right. Also, another really great question. So, the a couple of things about that. The first piece is if they're having exacerbations or flare ups while they're involved in sports, it's a good idea to kind of look at how they're using their controller medications. Because, as I said, if you maintain that low, if you reduce the inflammation as much as you can using the controllers, you have fewer and less severe flare-ups. Um, Having said that, you might actually need to take your reliever prior to actually participating in sports, which helps to kind of further calm your lungs down so that when you're breathing cold, dry air faster and trying and irritating your breathing tubes, you don't actually end up having a flare up. Again, that is a piece that you should take back to your healthcare provider to discuss And that way you'll know how much you should give them, if you should give them any reliever medication beforehand anyway. They'll also let you know how much and when to take it, probably about 15 minutes before the sport. That might help to reduce any flare-ups that happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to stress again the point you just made about talking to your healthcare provider, because asthma is not the same from person to person. Symptom management is not the same. What works now may not work down the road. As you said, it's kind of a dynamic process. So having that regular interaction with healthcare providers is extremely important. So thank you for touching on that as well. One of the parents has asked for assistance in communicating the extreme importance for teachers to watch for triggers and symptoms, because in this case, the parent says their son will basically go from 0 to 100 when it comes to an asthma episode. How do I explain how serious this asthma is? Because one of the things that I think this parent is alluding to, and we talk about this a lot at Asthma Canada, is it tends to be a disease that many people downplay and ignore the symptoms of. And people who don't have asthma think, oh, you just have a little trouble breathing once in a while. But as we know, it can be very serious, even life-threatening. So how can parents effectively communicate that with their teachers and with the schools?
Yep, I love that. So if your child has any difficulties in school, the first line of defense is to open up a channel of communication with your child's teacher and the administration. And as I showed in the presentation there, I know Asthma Canada has put together a nice introductory education package for the schools. So I would definitely approach the school, approach the teacher, have some material ready for them to actually address what the situation is. And like you said, when you're in that yellow zone, it's very easy to move from 0 to 100, like you said, into that red zone. And that's what you want to avoid. So communicating the importance of that is obviously your first line of defense, but helping you with that is the educational information that we can kind of provide you with, so that they can actually see that there's evidence-based information backing up what you're saying. Again, as your child's advocate, that would be your first line of defense.
Yeah, that's those are some good points. And again, I'll just take a second to stress that as the advocate, we are all health care advocates for ourselves and for our children and others that we're caregivers for. So it's really important to remember that. I'll just add one thing to your points, the excellent points you raised, and that's that we shouldn't assume anything when it comes to the schools or any environment that's childcare, any environment that a child might be exposed to. Don't assume that teachers have that kind of knowledge available. Teachers have to manage a lot in classrooms. I'm married to one, so I know that for sure. But it's just something that we just want to make sure we go that extra mile in terms of providing that exposure to the resources that we have available. So as Joyce said, we encourage everyone to avail yourselves of these. Make sure the teachers know that there are guides specifically available for them that can help. And if we work together, we can be effective at helping a child stay healthy and controlling their asthma. One of the questions came in about a child who only has asthma symptoms when he has a cold. So in that case, the question is, do you advise that the parents have the child's medications with them at school if they're only getting symptoms when they have a cold?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My rule is if you have asthma, you should always have your reliever medication readily available under any circumstances. Because at this point, yes, we understand that the trigger is viral infections, but like you said, we don't know what might happen moving ahead in the future. You always want that child prepared with the medication they need, because what we don't want to do is play catch up if they have a big flare up at school for whatever reason, or if their symptoms suddenly crop up while they're at school.
Best to stay on top of things for sure. So another question that's come in with COVID and flu, RSV, and others, how do I know the difference between asthma and symptoms of those respiratory illnesses, and what should I do to prevent?
Oh, that's a really good question as well. So, when you actually do have any of those infections, it is hard to tease out which is which. And generally, what happens is the infection will tend to trigger a lot of the symptoms that you would have for your asthma flare-ups. So, the best bet is actually to definitely consult your healthcare provider to tease out what symptoms are related to what. And when you are anticipating certain seasons that are cold and flu seasons, perhaps stepping up your controller medications according to your action plan is actually a good idea as well. Which is why it's important to have an action plan so that you know how to kind of, um, you know, meet it in advance. And the other recommendations I have for protecting yourself prophylactically is make sure that you're washing your hands, making sure that you're maintaining your distance, all of those safety precautions to help avoid getting an infection that will trigger your symptoms.
Great. Thank you, Joyce. Another parent writes that they're worried about their child being embarrassed to use their inhaler in front of their friends, in front of other kids. How can we help them feel more comfortable with managing their asthma in school with their, whether it's in school or just with their friends and peers in general?
Yeah, of course. That's really difficult for kids to navigate. So that makes a lot of sense. Again, I like this as an opportunity for educating people in the classroom. So maybe that is, again, another conversation that can happen with the parent and the teacher to kind of introduce some education so that the class and peers actually have a better understanding of what asthma is and why medication is necessary. That can actually be more helpful in the long run. And it can help with destigmatizing asthma inhaler use.
Absolutely. And that's one of the tragic things that we hear all too often is that children don't stay on top of things when they're not feeling well at school because they are embarrassed or they're afraid to stand up. So I think getting on top of that, just making sure that their friends and the classmates know that asthma is a disease that affects lots of children, almost a million just in Canada alone, and that in order to control the disease, we have to use these medications. And there is sometimes, unfortunately, a stigma associated with asthma that we're trying to break. And the best way we can do that, as you said, is stay on top of it and educating people about what asthma actually is, how it's treated, and how serious it can be, but if it can also be a disease that people can live well with if it's well controlled. So great advice there.
Absolutely. And in the case of this particular parent, make sure you're having those conversations with your child so they understand that, yes, they may have to do different things around how they're exercising or their activities at school, but that this is one of the things that helps keep them going because good management means that they can still completely participate like their friends are.
Exactly. Yeah, good points. Thank you. So I'm just scanning some of the questions that came in as well, and I think we've covered most of them that aren't looking for specific advice. And again, I'll direct people to our information services that we have at Asthma Canada, our helpline. You can see on the screen there is a toll-free phone number that you can call. You can also email us info@asthma.ca. We will connect individuals, whether they be parents, patients themselves, family members, teachers, anyone who has questions and concerns about asthma can reach out with any questions. We will try to address them, or we will refer people to services that they can avail themselves of as well. It is bilingual in English and French, so we encourage everyone to reach out whenever they have questions. Also, check back with our website on a regular basis, asthma.ca. We're constantly updating and adding resources to it. So we're here to help. We're here to provide information. If you even just have a question about where to find something on our website, just feel free to reach out anytime. We're always glad to interact with the community and offer sessions like this one. So Joyce, this has been fantastic. Lots of incredible information, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us and with the community that's joined us and those that will watch this webinar in the future as it goes on as a resource. And want to also just thank everyone for joining us, everyone who has joined us live and those that will be watching this recording. A reminder, Asthma Canada is here for you anytime you need us. And we also do encourage people to think about supporting the work that we do. Asthma.ca/donate is the donation page for Asthma Canada. If you are able to and inclined, we ask you to please consider making a donation. We appreciate all your support, Joyce, and everyone joining us. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.